how do you know if you're alert? How do you know if you're alert when you're sitting? Don't everybody speak at once. I mean, really, the den, it's like a... How do you know if you're alert, Brad?
Aware of sound sensations in the body.
Oh. See, that's a politically correct answer. It's kind of a good question, isn't it? Right? I mean, to just sort of check in to see how alert you are. Certainly, you know, it's like if you're over there and you say, "Am I alert?" Oops. I was talking, you know, on the YouTube, like if you watch the YouTube videos, and I'm always saying, and so on the Dharma tree, and then I'll just do like that, right? No one knows what the hell. Would take the camera and just turn it over there for a minute, and let people who are watching on the YouTube. So I thought when we were doing the beginner's course, you got out of the way, didn't you? Quick.
I did.
He's very shy too. I don't know what it is about meditation that attracts introverts. I don't know what that is. You know, the introverts, they just come like flies. So I always thought it was so. I love the idea when we were going to get that, because it's really a wonderful teaching device in terms of going through the Eightfold Path, the beginners and the intermediates too. So as we're just finishing the intermediate this coming Saturday, but we've been talked about, you know, like the 8 limbs on the tree there, and then the first 2 limbs are Pana, wisdom, and then the next 3 limbs are the ethical or the morality. And so last Saturday we tackled, yesterday we tackled the last 3 of right effort, and right mindfulness, and right samadhi. And it's interesting because during this 6 weeks, it's interesting how many people would come back, and most of those people had done the beginner's course, and they'd say, what is the difference again in mindfulness and concentration? It's kind of interesting, right? It's like it's not that easy to understand conceptually. I think maybe it really does have to be somewhat experienced. And I had that thought of how you have to separate things out before you can really see what they are, don't you? When they're mixed together, when they're glommed together, you don't have the clarity. And so to some extent, you do have to be able to sort of tease them out. Sati, or mindfulness, and Samadhi. You have to separate them conceptually, and then obviously when we were just sitting together, they weren't separate, were they? Right? I mean, they were one, you know, they do right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration, or Samadhi. They go together. So yesterday we had really kind of like a sparkling moment. It was just there was a moment where I tricked everybody into being mindful for a second. It was really funny. It was quite spontaneous. I had no intention of doing it, but I sort of like invited everybody to sort of, they weren't really prepared, and you could literally feel the energy in the room change. It was just an amazing moment. I mean, it's like, it was stunning. I just asked everybody, I said, you know, for a moment, I said, just stop and reflect, be aware that you're hearing. But it was all kind of like set up, and but anyway, everybody did it. Everyone sort of like just immediately, you could just feel this, like the whole room descend, right? The silence descended more deeply, and there were 2 or 3 people who just said. One person said, she said, I just want to hold on to that forever. It was such a powerful moment of understanding how powerful Sati, how powerful mindfulness is. It's very powerful. And as I said yesterday, I actually was going to read something about the last limb of Samadhi, which kind of is a favorite. I don't know. I love Samadhi, but anyway, Jane and I didn't have time to get to it. But as I've been saying to you all, and this is so unoriginal, it's pathetic. I never associated the word mindfulness with reflection. I've never done that. I've never read it in all the years that I have read Buddhist teaching. I've never heard anyone say that. It's a very big word in philosophy, by the way. The philosophers, the existentialists, right? The reflective mind, the mind that can reflect on whatever it's thinking. But the guy that I've been sharing with you all, his name is Nanavira Tera. It's very clear and it's quite elegant, but he separates out and he talks about. Well, I am doing it. I didn't think I was going to go. I was going to skip this and go on to something else, but it's just worth repeating over and over. Mostly, we're drawn from the day we're born. We're seduced by immediate experience. I just will use the word seduced. Immediate experiences, right, is seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, thinking, right? That's immediate experience. As you're sitting here, mostly, I would suggest most of you are in immediate experience. I would love to think that some of you are reflecting on the experience, and maybe you are, right? But you understand that immediate experiences, you're just paying attention to this. There it is out there. Visually, you're hearing, right? Sati would be you would be paying attention to yourself, right? You'd be paying attention to the way you're experiencing this, as opposed to being lost in the movie. So Nanavira says, right, that mindfulness is not immediate experience. It's a layer of consciousness above immediate experience. It's a reflection on, and it can occur simultaneously, but it certainly is going to slow you down. Right. Because if you're just going immediate experience, right, we're flying. But if there's a reflection going along, then the process is kind of slowed down a bit, I guess. I just made that up, but I guess it's true. But I think that I love it because it's so simple. You remember, so we were talking about Shenzhen Yang's definition of mindfulness, which is, what is it, threefold? It's like sensory
Clarity.
And equanimity. Throwing equanimity in there, my God, But so Jane said that yesterday. But I love the simplicity of just saying that mindfulness is just this reflection on experience, And when you just pause, I just did that a number of times just this morning for the hell of it, right? But when you just pause and say, well, okay, so here I am standing. Now, that's a little egotistical, I suppose, right? Because if you really wanted to be much more correct about it, so there you might be thinking, here I am lying on the cushion with my back against the wall and my legs crossed, right? When you just pause and allow yourself to reflect on or come into, and it doesn't have to be you don't have to be thinking that. You don't have to be thinking, right, well, here I am lying on the floor. You can just know that you're lying. But it changes, doesn't it? Doesn't it change? It brings you into your body immediately. Pulls you out of the head and brings you into this experience. So anyway, I think that is brilliant. As I said to people yesterday, I've never read it. I've read Buddhism and teaching for 40 years. I've never read anyone say that. So this was a smart guy, this Mr. Nanavira. But I wanted to share with you all something. So this is all just kind of tidbits, but I wanted to share this. This also is something that I don't think I have heard before, read. It says, so we were going to talk about Samadhi yesterday, but we didn't have time. We didn't get to it. So we stayed mostly on Sati. But I'm going to read this to you, and I'll maybe slow down. And so he's talking about. He says in the sutras we find something of this distinction between those who are, and the word is ditthipata. That would be people who have attained through right view, through right understanding, right? That would be ditti. Ditti means view. So he says that in the scriptures you find that there are people who have attained, who've reached, say, even stream entry through view, and then there are those who are sada vimita. I'm sorry, it's hell being deaf and blind. Sada means faith. So there are those who attain through faith, right? So they've heard the Buddha's teachings, and they've reflected on it and accepted after considering the ultimate principles. So that the first have heard the teaching, and they reflected on the teaching, mindfulness, which opens into wisdom. So that would be the right view. But then the others have accepted it because it inspires them with trust and confidence. That's faith. Now, if you think about Christianity or Judaism or Islam or any religion, if you think about it right, there are those two people who have been inspired by faith, loving Jesus, the faith, or the others who are inspired by the teachings, and so they are, they become whatever their faith is. Their religion is through understanding. So he says, and this is something that I bet no one in here has heard. I've never heard this. And this is by the way, is an absolute authority on the scriptures. He is flawless. He says, but there is a third kind of seika. That means someone who's attained. They're pretty high up. And he said, and that person is called akaya saki, which means a body witness. A body witness. So there's the people who've attained by view, the people who attain by faith, and he says in Buddhism, it's very clear in the scriptures, there's a third thing, it's called the body witness. Now, I had never heard that before. And he said, this is what's interesting to me, and what I wanted to share it with you all today. He said, it's quite without any corresponding category in Western philosophy. It says, he or she is the person who puts samadhi foremost. They develop mental concentration, and they go through the high states, and they need only so much wisdom and so much faith, but in other words, they don't require as much as the other paths because they're getting it through samadhi. And he quotes a scripture in the Anaguttara, or whatever it is, and he says, the Buddha was asked which of these three is the best path, and he declined to discriminate between them, saying that any one of them may outdistance the other two and arrive at the goal of attainment. Now, this is the part, so I really like this so much, and then I'm going to talk about it. He says, it is actually on this question of samadhi that Eastern thought is at its greatest distance from Western thought. And the latter, Eastern, can certainly, and the latter can be charged with sterility on this score. And he says, and I would include within that, he's included in all the existential philosophers. He likes existential philosophers. But he's pointing out that this is the thing that is missing in Western philosophy and religion, samadhi. And I think it's really, really, really fascinating because we don't think about that as when we're sitting. We don't tend to think about how very that this is the one thing that is just not practiced in our society, right? even mindfulness, right, which is becoming rather popular in California. But but samadhi is it's still a very strange thing. When I read Carl Jung, whom I love so much, and I read Freud, and I read the great psychologists, and you read the great philosophers, what's the one thing they didn't do? They didn't sit and meditate. They didn't know that part, right? It didn't occur to them that you can know something without thinking about it. And I once read somebody who, anytime you criticize Jung, you're in trouble with me, because, I mean, I really mean that. And the writer really, it's a very famous, well, I'll tell you, it's Thomas Cleary. He's famous translator and brilliant. But about Jung, he's absolutely stupid. He is absolutely stupid. But he said something that I think was really amazing. He said, I think he was afraid not to think. That just took my breath away when I read that. I had never read anyone ever say that, because it is true. Jung is just like, he's amazing in terms of his thought, right? And the brilliance of it, on top of brilliance, and I'm not exaggerating. As I said last week, I think that history will remember him as one of the greatest minds of 20th century, 21st century. But this guy said he was afraid not to think, and then as I'm reading La Vera, it does occur to me that that's the thing that's missing in our psychology and in our philosophy. All of our great philosophers, Immanuel Kant is wonderful, but all of the wonderful philosophers, they were convinced that the only way you can arrive at something is by thinking about it. You can't get there any other way, right? You've got to think about it. You've got to think about it. You process it analytically or whatever, but you think about it. And in some ways, the technique, Jung's technique of, for instance, active imagination, it's I'm quite convinced that he was really onto something about getting to incredible depth by a process of analysis. But it is true that the one thing that these guys were missing was this one little thing that we're trying to do here every Sunday. We're trying to sit, right, and develop, among other things, this ability for the mind to just become very still. Again, like as I said yesterday, that I love Ajahn Chah's description of samadhi as a still forest pool. Did you hear that? I was looking at that person. Or you have that? You have a pensive look on your face. Yeah, a still forest pool. So he would describe it right as that it's so still that the little animals can creep out from the bushes. The little animals can all creep out from behind the bushes, and they can come to that pool because they're utterly safe. And in some ways, if you think about it as a metaphor for whatever it is inside, whatever this is that's running around inside in terms of fear, anxiety, memories, whatever. When you think of a mind that has gotten so still that those things can come up, then that obviously is the beginning of really knowing yourself. Tremendous knowledge, self-knowledge. So y'all have heard me say this 1,000 times. I'm going to repeat it one more time. I think that of all the translations of Buddhist words that we use, I mean, like, so we don't know, we don't say Sati, we say mindfulness, right? And that's kind of okay. It kind of captures it. But to capture samadhi with the word concentration is just pretty ridiculous. It's just ridiculous because, concentration to us is, someone said, I think Jane said, it's furrowed eyebrows, right? Concentration It's this, right? Oh my God. I've got to write a paper for the end of the, so then you spend all night long concentrating, writing up your term paper or whatever. But concentration to us is like, it's external. It's all about external. It's like putting the mind on that outside object and doing it, running through it or whatever. But of course, samadhi is just the opposite of that. It's this capacity for the mind to totally rest, to be at extraordinary rest and alert at the same time. That paradox in a sense of that the mind is not laboring at all. You're not wasting any energy. You're not pouring energy into thinking or whatever. The mind is at rest, and at the same time, if it is samadhi, it's absolutely alert. So that's why, Now, I asked the question when you all were sitting today. I said, "Are you alert?" Right? How would you know that you're alert? That's mindfulness. Right? So that's the problem with samadhi, right? So you can get, the mind can start getting very concentrated, and before you know it, you're snoring. So in other words, samadhi must have mindfulness. It has to have sati. It's just that sati is not the most important part in samadhi. Whereas in another practice, like pure vipassana, you're not really trying to ratchet up the samadhi, you're ratcheting up the mindfulness. But I don't think that. Well, I'll just say it, repeat myself. You go back, so like before the Buddha was born, I think he was born in 1892, wasn't he? So before the Buddha was born, 2,600 years ago. Like when I was like about 30 or 40 years ago, I used to say 2,500 years ago. And I thought, we've been saying 2,500 years now for 100 years. And so I think pretty soon people are going to start saying he was born 2,600 years ago. And that's really interesting. And you think, oh my God, time is moving on. But quite a bit before his birth, he was born, the rishis, they were called rishis, they were these sages, wandering sages in India. And so that's going to take you back 300, 400, 500 years before the Buddha. Yeah, now you're talking 3,000 years ago and more. Unlike whatever we were doing here in the West, we were going to the movies, weren't we? Unlike, they were going into the forest and they were sitting and they were learning how to meditate. It's amazing if you think about it. 3,000 years ago, 400, 500, 600 years before the Buddha was born, these people, and so Samadhi is much older than the Buddha, right? It's much older. The word is much older than the Buddha. And you could say, some people argue, I'm going to say this, then I'm going to quit talking. I get easily bored with myself. You know what Marta said? And I do also. No, you didn't, did you? You did. So some people would argue that, okay, so samadhi was tremendously practiced, and when the Buddha first went on his sadhana, he studied with two of the great meditation teachers in India, two of the great, the most famous ones, and apparently he just did it like that. But one of the things that you hear or you read is that the Buddha's concluded that, and you all have heard this before, but that the absence of that mindfulness is what causes one to get in this practice of samadhi and not go further, right? Because so he emphasized mindfulness and so it's number 7 on the tree there. mindfulness. It's the seventh limb, and then Samadhi is the eighth limb. I think it's fascinating that he put mindfulness 7, right, and Samadhi 8. But I wanted to just say that when you read the scriptures, there's this really interesting tension there. So, and this is going back to what he said about the Samadhi, the body witness, is what he called it. And by the way, I think of yoga as in some ways associated with that. But when you read the scriptures, it's really fascinating because you'll find many scriptures where he clearly is saying that you can get there through Samadhi. He clearly is saying that. He's talking about it. And so they'll say, well, how do you get there? And he'll start with the first John, the second John, the third John, the fourth John, the fifth John. But, and then, but he talks about these incomprehensible states of going beyond a state of perceiving and not perceiving. You want to try that one on? Going beyond perceiving and not perceiving. And he suggests that you can reach a state where consciousness ends. Well, you're not going to have a hell of a lot of mindfulness in a state where consciousness ends, right? I mean, it's not possible. And then you'll read other passages, other scriptures, where he goes right on the other side, and then he talks about how mindfulness is the thing, right? Mindfulness is the path, right? And then people argue with some of the translation of it, but mindfulness is the path to purification of the mind and eventually enlightenment. So there are those two interesting poles, and there's a kind of a tension, and so some people take the mindfulness as the path. Some people take the Samadhi as the path, and I don't think you could. Even in different traditions will emphasize them. But it's like I said, when we're sitting, we actually are, they're both. We're using both. And I think Jane said yesterday, it's certainly true, sometimes you need to ratchet up the mindfulness. It's kind of, it's just clear, right? Right. You need to ratchet up because you're not alert. There is no alertness, and you will not get to Samadhi. You can't get there to the alert, restful mind without mindfulness. But on the other hand, there are times when I think the Buddha really said this. There's nothing wrong with experiencing the bliss and the peace and the joy of just that mind in Samadhi. Jung talks about, I love this, he talks about people who dream of something green, something growing, and they'll be dreaming about a plant, or something green in their dream. And he says this is always a sign of new growth, something being born in the psyche that's coming up. And I always think of Samadhi as being almost like a container for that. Samadhi is almost like this container for the new to come up. Or not. All right, so that's all I have to say. Do you want to ask or make a comment or whatever? This is called clearing the path. Oh, I want to just share this one more thing before we end. I said this to John, who's not here today. John was talking about how much he enjoyed the dependent origination course we did last year, and he said he wished we would repeat it because he'd like to do it again. But I had said this when we did that course last year, that one of the things that I was very uncomfortable with was this idea, this standard idea that the dependent origination occurs over 3 lifetimes, right? The first 3, so it occurs over 3 lifetimes. And I was never comfortable with that. And I was never comfortable with this idea that the Buddhist teachings, which are so based on experience, are asking you to believe something on faith. I never liked that. It always seemed inconsistent with me. And so, I mean, I think I even said that when I said, well, the way I would suggest we do the 12 nidanas is they apply to this one lifetime. So anyway, so I find this book, and I really was attracted to it because the man committed suicide, and I thought, I want to read about a man who committed suicide, which is really true. It's an extraordinary story. That's the first thing he says. When I first opened the thing, he said he didn't say it's crap, but he said it's made up. He said the Buddha never said it. He said it's all commentators and scholars who came later and add all of these brilliant things, which I never liked. I never liked any of them. They never made any sense to me. And that's going back. And for years, when you would go to a retreat at Spirit Rock or IMS or anywhere, the commentators are so important, right? The people who wrote about the Buddha's teaching. But this guy said, don't read those things. And he goes through and he says there is absolutely no indication in the scriptures that the Buddha said that at all, right, about the 12 nidanas, that they apply over 3 lifetimes. It's just somebody came up with it, and now it's standard teaching. So that's why I so like this book, because anytime you read something where the person agrees with you, you're convinced they're brilliant, right? You're just But it is interesting he does that. I mean, he absolutely just dismisses that. And and I'll tell you, Tibetan Buddhism would be in a lot of trouble with Nanavira, because it is based a lot on scriptures that are, he just says that you should stick to what the Buddha taught. He would have been a good Southern Baptist. Mm-hmm. However, so I'm not that hardcore at all, because I think that there's tremendous value to the Tibetan and to the Zen, the Mahayana. But this guy dismissed it all. He said if the Buddha didn't say it, dispense with it. Anyway, now I'm finished.